Victor Manuel Garena. So, back in 1983, a man named Victor Manuel Garena decided he was done with the 9-to-5 grind at Wells Fargo, where he worked as a security guard. Instead of just quitting like a normal person, he interrogated two of his coworkers, roughed them up a little so they could give him the vault code, and then tied and injected them with a sedative. After this, he casually got the money and walked out of the front door with $7 million in cash. That's right, $7 million straight out of the vault. He had already made all the plans beforehand and mastered all the routines, plus working as a security guard gave him the best advantage. The guy never fired a single shot. Like, dude didn't even have to have a gun. Talk about being efficient. Garena pulled off the heist so smoothly that it almost sounded like an Ocean's 11 subplot. But instead of heading to Vegas, he just went poof and disappeared. The FBI has been chasing him for over 40 years, and this guy has somehow managed to stay one step ahead. Some investigators say he fled to Cuba, where he's probably living his best escaped fugitive life ever since. Eugene Palmer. While grandparents are sweet, they can also be particularly grumpy, but Eugene Palmer basically took grumpy old man to a whole new level and then ran for the hills. This guy is wanted by all the local authorities, and not for pulling off elaborate heists or masterminding massive crimes. Palmer's story is a little more family drama gone horribly wrong. So in 2012, Palmer, who was 73 at the time, got into a heated argument with his daughter-in-law, Tammy. Apparently, he didn't like how she was treating his son during their divorce. So, instead of settling the dispute with passive-aggressive Facebook posts like a normal person, he decided to shoot her. That's right, Grandpa Eugene grabbed a shotgun and shot her dead in her own driveway. He took the phrase, "don't mess with my family," a little too literally. After the murder, the old man took off into the woods near his property like he was starring in his own backwoods survival movie. Palmer was also an experienced outdoorsman, so authorities believe he's been hiding out somewhere in the mountains, which honestly sounds exhausting for a 73-year-old. Now, while most grandpas his age are worried about keeping their lawn nice or relaxing with a fishing rod, Grandpa Eugene is spending his last days in the jungle like some sort of Tarzan with a crime history. Samantha Luthwaite. If you thought women didn't have what it took to be hardened criminals, then you're in for a huge surprise, because Samantha Luthwaite is out here proving that she's no damsel in distress, but rather a damsel causing distress. At first glance, you'd think this woman should be hosting bake sales or organizing the perfect Christmas parties, but the reality is that she is actually one of the world's most wanted terrorists. Popularly known as the White Widow, and no, not the Marvel kind, Samantha Luthwaite is a mastermind behind Al-Shabaab, an extremist group in East Africa that basically trains and recruits women to become bombers. Talk about promoting gender equality. The White Widow would literally Waldo spend her time assisting and creating plots for different terrorist attacks, specifically across Kenya and Somalia. Her involvement and antics resulted in the death of over 400 people and the injury of millions more. Now, that's not a resume you want to boast about on LinkedIn. However, despite numerous sightings and being on the FBI watch list, the White Widow has managed to evade capture like she's got a lifetime supply of invisibility cloaks. Currently, she has a $1 million bounty on her head, but still, nobody has been able to actually give a proper explanation or direction as to her whereabouts. The Toy Car Killer. As a kid, you were probably in love with Batman and Spider-Man, and probably even fantasies of becoming a vigilante like them. But, well, as you grew up, that fantasy died with your childhood. But not according to a man who became popularly known as the Toy Car Killer. This particular guy operated in Mexico in 2019 and took on the job of personally dealing out punishment to car thieves. This guy had the weird ability to find people who think life is one big grand theft auto, and would go through extreme measures to make your life a living hell before ultimately unaliving you. If you were a car thief during this period, the Toy Car Killer would find you, cut off all your fingers and tongue, and then proceed to shoot you multiple times. After this, he would stage your body lying face down with the amount of cars you've stolen in your lifetime. Some of his victims were found with as many as 13 to 15 toy cars, all systematically arranged on their dead corpses. Now, unlike other serial killers who follow specific routines, this guy switched it up. He didn't have a type or a fixed location for his attacks. One day it was in a park, the next day near a busy street. He was the wild card of killers, making it impossible for the police to predict his next moves. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that kept changing. To this day, nobody knows who this killer is, and all efforts made to catch him have not yielded any results. Some people actually believe he's some kind of hero, but the truth remains that he is a killer. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. It all started in Mexico in the 1980s when Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes dropped out of primary school and illegally migrated to the United States in search of the American dream. Sadly, all he found was more like the American nightmare because he was caught, arrested several times, and finally deported to Mexico in the early 1990s. Now, back in Mexico, Nemesio decided that the best cause of action was to become an apprentice to one of the most gruesome drug cartels in the area. After years of servitude, he eventually climbed the criminal corporate ladder and became one of the biggest bosses for the Milenio Cartel. He eventually decided to go solo and founded the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a cartel that specialized in brutal killings, torture, and evil crimes. These guys would make your average crime syndicate look like a kindergarten. As the head of this cartel, he tortured, murdered, and dismembered cartel rivals or anyone who dared stand in his way. After dismembering a body, he'd hang it from a bridge as a warning to anyone trying to mess up. It's like a horror movie scene, except it's tragically real. In one incident, Nemesio's cartel shot down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade, killing soldiers in an ambush that shocked even the hardened military forces in Mexico. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, has El Mencho on its most wanted list, offering a reward so significant that it could probably pay off a small country's debt. If you want to find out more about all the crazy things people have done and gotten away with, then you can start by joining our Discord server today. Arnoldo Jimenez. Now, the normal end to any wedding vow is the phrase, "till death do us part," which is actually supposed to be a romantic gesture of your undying love and loyalty. Well, this guy, Arnoldo Jimenez, was not joking when he said his vows because he took them way too literally. It all started in 2012 when Jimenez married his girlfriend Estrella Carrera, but instead of riding off into the sunset for their honeymoon, they decided to go party in a limo. Now that sounds very fun and spontaneous, but unfortunately the new bride Estrella was found dead in her bathtub, still in her sparkly silver wedding dress with no sign of her husband. Apparently they had an argument on their wedding night, so in a fit of rage, Jimenez ran to the kitchen, took a sharp knife, and stabbed her multiple times. But instead of leaving her to bleed on the floor, he dragged her to the bathroom and dumped her in the bathtub till she bled to death. Talk about cutting the honeymoon short. As for Jimenez, he didn't stick around for the who did it part. After the murder, he fled faster than a bad first date. A night that was supposed to be the happiest day of both of their lives suddenly turned into a horror movie freak show, and till today, the murderous groom has remained on the run. Vasilis Palios-Kostas. If you've ever read or watched movies based on Robin Hood, you can easily imagine the kind of criminal Vasilis Palios-Kostas was. Except instead of using arrows and robbing the rich like the fictional Robin Hood, Vasilis used guns and robbed banks. Vasilis Palios-Kostas began operating as a robber in the 1980s in Greece. After robbing banks, he'd give all the stolen money to poor families living in the rural part of Greece, a strategy that made Vasilis very difficult to catch because it was practically impossible to trace the stolen cash back to him. Because of his goodwill toward the poor, he won over the crowd and the guy practically became a folk hero in Greece, with people rooting for him like he's the underdog in a heist movie. They even started calling him the Greek Robin Hood. But like all good heist movie characters, the law caught up with him in 2006. He was tossed into a maximum security prison with a 25-year sentence. But Vasilis had no intention of staying locked up for that long. After 5 months in jail, his brother hired a helicopter, flew over to the prison, and literally airlifted Vasilis to freedom as if he were Tom Cruise in a Mission Impossible movie. Now you'd think he'd lay low after his prison break, but Vasilis went right back to his Robin Hood routine, dodging cops and throwing cash like confetti for 2 more years. He was basically Greece's most wanted party guest. Of course, he got caught again in 2008. But like a guy with a helicopter loyalty card, he escaped again in 2009 with another helicopter. This time, though, he decided to hang up his Robin Hood tights and fully went into hiding. Sharon Kinney. Sharon Kinney wasn't your average 1960s housewife, unless your idea of average involves a gun, multiple murders, and a Houdini-level escape. Her crime spree began on March 19, 1960, when she decided that her husband needed a permanent nap and shot him in the head while he was sleeping. Naturally, when the authorities showed up, Sharon had a story ready. She blamed their 2-year-old daughter for accidentally pulling the trigger while playing with the loaded gun. That's right, Sharon threw her 2-year-old toddler under the bus. Despite the suspicious circumstances, Sharon got off with a shrug and a not guilty verdict. Besides, it's not like the toddler could talk to testify what had happened. The next year, Sharon started a romantic fling with a man named Walter Jones. But the problem was that Walter had a wife, Patricia Jones, and he would never leave her for Sharon no matter how badly she begged. So she decided to settle the love triangle the only way she knew how. One evening in 1962, Sharon lured Patricia to a dark alley, and using the same gun she had used on her husband, she shot Patricia first in the leg to cripple her from running away before pumping her chest full of bullets. She put the dead body in a body bag and dumped it in a trash bin. Unfortunately, Sharon didn't have a toddler to blame this time, and she was caught and arrested. However, while she was awaiting trial, she escaped to Mexico with the help of yet another lover. Now, you'd think Sharon would chill out after fleeing to another country, but she couldn't resist using that same gun again. This time, another lover of hers got her mad, so the only logical solution in her eyes was to shoot him. Shoot him right in the back. Later, she claimed it was self-defense because he tried to assault her, but Mexico wasn't having it, and she was sentenced to 13 years in a Mexican prison. She escaped from the prison in December 1969 and vanished into thin air. She had not been seen in 50 years. Bhadresh Kumar Chitambai Patel. If you live in the US, you've probably seen a Dunkin' Donuts, or maybe even grabbed a cup of coffee and donuts to kickstart your morning. Well, in 2015, Bhadresh Kumar Chitambai Patel turned one of those donut havens into a real-life horror show. On the night of April 12, 2015, while working the night shift at a Dunkin' Donuts in Hanover, Maryland with his wife Palak, they got into a heated argument. Palak had suggested that they pack up and head back to India, but Patel was having none of it, so in a fit of rage, he turned his wife into a breathing, living punching bag. But just beating her unconscious wasn't enough, so he grabbed the kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times in the stomach and chest before finally slicing her neck, leaving her to bleed and choke to death. He dropped the murder weapon on the floor and fled the scene without a trace. Authorities think he may have escaped to India or is being hidden by family or friends. Despite the FBI offering a $250,000 reward for information leading to his arrest, Patel has managed to dodge capture for years. Roberto Solis. Roberto Solis is basically a real-life criminal mastermind who somehow turned his life into a mix of a heist movie, a poetry reading, and a disappearing act that would make any magician proud. Starting in the late 1950s, Roberto was dabbling in petty crimes like robbing stores, pickpocketing, and snatching purses. Small-time stuff, just enough to keep his criminal streak alive, but not quite enough to pay the rent. He soon realized you can't live the high life with a pickpocket salary, so he decided to upgrade his crime game. In 1969, he robbed an armored truck, but the heist went wrong, and he had to shoot the truck guard 8 times in the head, chest, stomach, and legs just to escape. You see, his escape wasn't exactly a clean one because he had left his fingerprints all over the crime scene like it was his personal business card. 2 weeks later, he was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. But of course, for a guy like Roberto, life in prison was more like a really long coffee break. While behind bars, he managed to rebrand himself as a poet, writing under the alias Pacho Aguia, because apparently even hardened criminals need side hustles. And believe it or not, his poetry was so good that he gained a loyal fan base of supporters who helped him get paroled in 1992. But instead of living out his parole with a quiet, peaceful life, Roberto did what any self-respecting criminal mastermind would do. He went right back to heists. This time he teamed up with his girlfriend, Heather Tallchief, and in 1993, they pulled off one of the biggest armored truck robberies in US history, stealing a cool $3.1 million in Las Vegas. Talk about upgrading your career. Heather eventually surrendered in 2005, probably because carrying around all that guilt and cash cash gets heavy. But as for Roberto, it's like his existence was practically wiped off the face of the earth. Glenn Stewart Godwin. Glenn Stewart Godwin started out as your average small-time thief, but he decided to take his criminal resume to the next level in 1980 when he murdered a guy named Kim LaValle. Apparently, Glenn and a buddy thought robbing LaValle would be easy money, but things went sideways faster than you can say bad plan. So Glenn stabbed LaValle multiple times, and just to add his own flair, he blew up the poor guy's body in the desert like it was a bad action movie. Shockingly, blowing someone up didn't help him avoid the law. Glenn was caught and sentenced to 26 years to life for murder. He was shipped off to Folsom Prison, a maximum security facility in California, a place he was determined not to stay very long. In 1987, Glenn got a little creative and literally dug his way to freedom through a storm drain system that was pretty much an underground labyrinth. After crawling through the muck, he popped out the other side, probably smelling like a combo of regret and sewage, and made a run for it. He fled to Mexico and picked up a new criminal hobby, drug trafficking. He was recaptured in 1991 for trafficking drugs and thrown into a Mexican prison. While locked up, he killed another inmate by strangling him to death just to earn some respect among the Mexican prison crowd. Fast forward to 1996, Glenn escaped the prison again like it's just a fun weekend activity and hasn't been seen since. He's now a professional fugitive, with the FBI still scratching their heads over where he might be. Vitellome Innocent. Now, Vitellome Innocent is one of those guys whose names is hilariously ironic because this guy is a million miles away from innocent. Vitellome is a Haitian gang leader and a certified nightmare for law enforcement. His infamous crime was back in 2021 when Vitellome and his gang, known as the 400 Mawozo, kidnapped 16 Americans and 1 Canadian in Haiti, all of whom were missionaries. The gang snatched them up at gunpoint and held them for ransom like they were living out some bad action movie plot. Vitellome demanded a cool $1 million per person and gave only 24 hours for the demands to be met. Naturally, the authorities didn't cough up the cash fast enough, so Vitellome, never one to bluff, began executing the hostages in the most terrifying way possible. Gunshots to the head, throat slitting, strangulation, you name it. He even had the audacity to film the whole thing and send it to the cops like a twisted highlight reel. The executions only stopped once the gang got their payday, and the remaining missionaries were released. Aside from kidnapping, Vitellome and his gang are also involved in armed robbery, extortion, murder, and drug trafficking. As of today, Vitellome and his crew are still running Haiti like they own the place, setting up roadblocks, getting into shootouts, and having the cops on speed dial. The authorities might be trying to stop him, but with the 400 Mawozo crew, it's like trying to put out a fire with a water gun.